Um, Also, I hope everybody's catering is good. I got my coffee. Let's hope we can make the best out of the online version of this. So, hi, I'm Philip. Let me talk a bit about logging and Spring Boot and how you can combine that and make the most out of that. What you want to have is, or where you want to go quickly normally, is production. And we all love production until production doesn't love us anymore, which often looks something like this, where you have that this is fine and actually everything is broken. And then you want to figure out why everything is broken, because we want to get back to production and proper production. So where do you start if stuff is breaking? Oftentimes your logs, which gives you some of these pieces of information. So my assumption about whatever you're logging is that every log has a timestamp. You will have a log level like error, one, debug, whatever you have. You will have a message. Potentially you also have a service, because if you have more than a couple of services, you want to know where things are coming from. So these are the things that you will have in your logs. And then the idea is, having been in production, where do you find or combine all of those logs? So the thing where many people are starting from is probably SSH and tail. And normally I would ask the audience, like, please raise your hand if you're doing this or don't. Everybody can probably think deep inside, like, are we still using or relying on SSH and tail? Which you probably shouldn't, especially if you have more than a couple of servers or services. Or if you have anything like Docker and Kubernetes, it's not so easy to actually just connect to the right instance and also even know where it's running or what is running right now. So you need something maybe sooner is that your log files might be where you see we have our not so small log file, and then you're the little submarine trying to figure out what is even going on here, or where are we and what do we have in that file. And then in the end, you have a bunch of options and you don't even know where to start. So let's kind of like figure out how to work with our production logs the right way. Let's see why I'm talking about this. So I work for Elastic, the company behind Elasticsearch, Logstash, Cabana, Beats. You might have heard of us before, or especially in the context of logs. That's why I'm trying to get the message out how to work with logs in production in a sane way without making your life too complicated. Elk is the thing that we had for a long time that you've maybe heard or seen. It's the first letters of Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Cabana, and if you put them on top of each other like here, this is what you're getting. Sometimes people are confused and ask, like, why would you use a full-text search engine as the core of that? Because this is not a search problem, but actually it is a search problem. What you want to have with logs is you want to be able to find something. You're not really interested in storing logs. What you're interested in is finding something relevant in your logs. And this is why we think, or why Elasticsearch is a good choice for that. We have added another component here called Beats, which is like a lightweight agent, a shipper. Because Elk, the classic approach, was great many years ago when we started with that, like almost 8 or so. But things have developed a bit further. And I will show you how you can get the most out of your setup with this new Beats component as well, which will leave you something or a stack that looks something like this. So you have Beats as a lightweight agent or shipper, forwarding your logs to Elasticsearch, which centralizes them. And then Cabana can show you what is going on in there. And that's the general idea. And obviously we'll have a demo and we'll try to collect as many logs as we can of our very simple Spring Boot application to see where this is headed. Today, I won't need Logstash, so we'll just skip that component. So this is not always necessary anymore. Before I dive into the details, let's think a bit about what you often do with logs. So Logstash and that approach that you forward your logs to Logstash and then you parse it in Logstash was a great approach like a couple of years ago, but it's sometimes a bit cumbersome nowadays, because what you often have is your application has the logs in the right format. Your application knows what field is what. So you know this is the log level and this is the timestamp and this is the log message and this might be any additional information around it, like MDC, the map diagnostic context. And then you ship it off in a single log line, which is basically breaking it out into like a piece of sushi. And at the end, you want to get back to the originally structured format again. So you want to get the fish back. And this is kind of a problem that many people face, that in your application, everything is nice and structured, and then you flatten it out to a file, and then you want to get back to the original structure. So you have the fish, the sushi, and then you try to make the fish again out of the sushi, which is not that easy and maybe not what you want to do. Also, how you normally get from the sushi back to the fish is with a regular expression, or grok as we call it, a named regular expression. However, what many people find out over time is that the plural of regular expression is regret. And that's why maybe you don't want to write those regular expressions, unless sometimes people do. And I always call it the Stockholm syndrome. You get so used to writing regular expressions that at some point you start liking it, or maybe it's job security. That might be the other reason why you might want to have that. Another problem with this general approach with the classic log file and the log lines are multi-line logs. Because if you're not careful when you collect those logs, you might just collect every single line individually. And for multi-line logs, as in a stack trace, is one line of a stack trace very helpful? Not really. So you basically want to recombine that in the right order again to get back to the original stack trace, to actually figure out what was happening in that stack trace. And for me, that's a bit like you have the burger with the hashed meat, and then you want to get back to the steak, where you need to reassemble all the individual lines from that stack trace. And again, this is making your life unnecessarily hard. So there are better approaches to that. So one thing that people tried was that your application, rather than writing out to a log file directly, would send the logs off maybe to Logstash or whatever other centralized log location you could use. You could send that off directly. But that has trade-offs, because first, you suddenly have more coupling, because now your application needs to know, where do I even send this? And when you reconfigure that, you might need to redeploy your application, which is not great. Also, if the network is down, for example, you might not receive the logs. And normally when a network is down or something is broken, that's when you're most interested in the logs. So sending directly has trade-offs, and I'm not sure if that is really what is the right approach to do. So we have kind of tried to rethink logging, and Elk is definitely a valid tool and was a great solution many years ago. But right now, there is a better approach how to make your life easier and how to quickly go from production to centralized logging without having to build anything complex around it. And that's kind of the gist of what I want to show you today. Like after discussing these problems, how can we solve them? So the first thing that we have here is we have, it's called Elastic Common Schema. It's basically a naming convention. The trick here is that all the components in our stack are trying to follow that naming convention. And then you have the semantic meaning of what is what. So for example, when FileBeat picks up the right field and forwards it, then Cabana can visualize, for example, a log level correctly. Also, you don't have to think about how do I call my individual fields, and we can correlate across many different inputs or sources. So if you have an Nginx log or a Spring Boot log, both will use log.level, for example, for the log level. And then you can just figure out the errors and what has been going wrong. So this is one of the pieces that we have to have a common naming convention. So you don't have to make up that naming convention yourself, but you can follow one. And the other thing is that you can then tie this naming convention into your application. And for us, this is called the ECS, the Elastic Common Schema Java logs, or logging Java is the library that we use for that. And that ties into the various logging backends that are available. So Logback, Log4j2, and Log4j1, as well as Joule by now. All of those have an ECS compliant output. And then you can simply tail that, throw it into Elasticsearch, and you're basically done. You don't have to write any regular expressions. It will just format everything as JSON, because that's what you need in Elasticsearch anyway. And it will follow the right naming convention so that you don't have to do any parsing or changing of the data anymore. And all you basically need to do is, in your log appender, you just add that formatting. The formatting will then emit the right JSON format. Then FileBeat, the lightweight agent or shipper, basically takes the log file, stores it directly in Elasticsearch, and Cabana can visualize that, and then you're done. And this is basically what I want to show you. A few nice attributes of that logging library is that it has a very consistent naming convention internally. It doesn't have any dependencies, so you won't have any conflicts and it won't pull down any bigger dependencies. It doesn't use reflection. It has very low latency. And in the case of Log4j2, it's garbage free. So it will be very lightweight actually to generate those logs for you. And with that, I probably have spoken enough. Let's try to look at the demo. And I see quite a bit of stuff going on in the chat. I will come back to chat and answer all your questions there later on. But let me dive into the demo to show you what I have here. So I have forked the Spring Boot security demo that is basically just giving you a login form where you can log in, and then user and password is the only correct login form that you can use here. And I have extended that with a bit of logging. So what I have done here is I have added an authentication event listener. And basically, depending on if you're successful, I will log an info message that you were able to successfully log in here. And if not, I will log that you failed to log in with whatever username, and I will blank out your password with stars. But I will log all of that. And then if you're trying to log in as an admin, I will throw a runtime exception so that we have a stack trace in here as well, that there is no admin here. Quick look at the logging setup. So what we have in application properties, all you need to do here is I'm setting the application name to Spring Boot security that we will use later on. And then we configure where we're logging. So next to my jar that I'm generating, I will just output a Spring Boot security log file. And then in your logback configuration, all you need to do is here, so we have added ECS, our logging library, as a dependency. And then in the logback Spring XML, you just add that new format here. And then you can say, like, rather than having the log file below, I will just use that ECS JSON file. And that will then emit JSON directly. You don't need to do any parsing. Filebeat can just tail that JSON file and you're done. So to get some action going here, if you go to Xera WTF, so Xera is my Twitter handle. It's Rod13 of my last name, if you're wondering where that weird name is coming from. And WTF is generally the right domain for any demo. And let's hope it doesn't break in a weird way. But this is running here. So if you head to Xera WTF, you will have this login form here. And you can also try to log in and then generate some errors. And we will log these errors live. So if I add Philipp and the wrong username and the wrong password, it will obviously fail to log in. It was user secret, if I remember correctly, was the only combination, sorry, user password that will log you in correctly, but it doesn't matter. Like, we are just interested in getting bad login requests, and then we can monitor those. So let's see what we have been collecting. So if you have never seen Cabana, this is Cabana, and the first view that you often look at is this cover. So here, as you can see, Filebeat is that component that is tailing our log file. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Let me show you what I'm doing here. So this here basically is the entire configuration that I'm using to collect the JSON log file that my Spring Boot application is now generating. So I'm just providing the path. I say that this is JSON and that I will collect everything that is in there. And then I will forward that information to Elasticsearch. Also, for example, I'm running my application behind an Nginx reverse proxy that also terminates TLS, and I can collect the Nginx logs and system logs and some other pieces. But this is the entire configuration that you need. So you have the ECS logging library, this Filebeat that forwards to Elasticsearch, and that is everything you need. There is no more regular expression or anything involved here. And I guess this is you. So thank you a lot for all the logs. Right now, Filebeat contains all the log events that have been generated in the last 15 minutes. And this includes the system and Nginx. And if I remember correctly, the one thing that I'm interested in here is service name. And the service name is with equals here, you can filter down on which service you're interested in, and it will give you all the services that you have running. So if you have 5 Spring Boot services running, and all of them have a distinct name, you can just filter down on one of these distinct services, like I'm doing here. So I'm only interested in the logs of this one Spring Boot application that I have running here. And I can now filter down on that. So rather than having 850 logs events, hopefully this will filter down to fewer. Let's see. And you can see, okay, this is when you started logging in. Thanks for all the login requests. And you can see we got 130 of those here now. So if I look at one of these login events, this is what we have been emitting. I am enriching that a bit with cloud information, for example. So you can see this is running on AWS. This is a T2 small instance. This is the instance ID. This is the base image that I'm using. So I'm adding that information. For example, if you know the problem with one specific instance ID or one availability zone on Amazon, you could easily filter down on just the logs for that specific instance. Though here this should be fine and not an issue. Then you see I'm adding some host information. So this is running on Ubuntu 18.04. And now further down here, we have the specific pieces for our log event. And you can see it was a log level 1 where we have collected it. And then we can see who tried to log in with a 3-letter password. And we're blanking that out. And for example, here you could easily say, I want to see all the warn messages. With the plus icon, you could just filter down on those. Or you could, for example, exclude all the warn messages. And let me try to exclude the warn messages to see if we have anything that is not a warning, which might be an error. Or you could, of course, search explicitly for an error. And this will then automatically update. So you can see we have excluded log level 1, and now we're down to 46 events. And now we could dive into what were these errors that we were running into. And let me just open one here. You can see this was an info message because user logged in successfully. So could exclude that or whatever. And by the way, that filtering, you could, if you have this running on Docker, you could just filter down on a specific Docker image. If you have this running on Kubernetes and you add the metadata from Kubernetes, you could filter down on a specific namespace or pod. So this gives you a lot of options for slicing and dicing your data and just seeing how this is developing over time. One other thing or one other way to view your data, by the way, is we have added, let me jump to this one first. We have a new logs view that is a bit more like tail F. Because the previous view was very nice to find individual documents and everything, but it was not really the tail F experience. What you can do instead here is, here I can just say, for example, I'm filtering down on service.name again. So this is the service I want, then I have an equals, and then I will filter down on my Spring Boot security again. This will update. And then you can see these are all the log events that I have been collecting. And then what you could do, for example, is you could switch this to live streaming, and then you could just like tail F follow whatever is happening with that specific service. There will be like there will be a delay of maybe a couple of seconds between generating the log file, forwarding it, and then being available in Elasticsearch and being you are able to see it here. But this is kind of like a very convenient way to see how things are going. And yeah, I would appreciate if everybody keeps the usernames to the code of conduct, and I don't have to blank out anything in the video afterwards. So this is very easy to do, and this is a great way to get started with logging. But we can take this to the next level. And for the last 10 minutes, let me show you how you could take this to the next level. So I will quickly switch branch in my code because you don't want to see me coding. or otherwise we would just spend the last 10 minutes here with this. So what I've changed here is I'm trying to go from more log-like events, log-like structures to event-like structures. So what I'm now doing here is I have added some metadata to that event to actually give it more meaning. So here I'm using MDC, the map diagnostic context, to actually extract more meaningful fields. So for example, here I'm using user.name, and then we store that, and then we store the URL where this is coming from, also the IP address. And then I also have an event.action. And then I could tell like, okay, this was a successful login, or this was a failed login. Let me quickly stop my application and restart it with that second version, which has this structured MVC information. And then we can actually see how this one is going. So the idea here is rather than just having a log line and then having to figure out what is this, that you add more structured information. So for example, for logins that you could figure out like, are my users able to log in successfully, yes or no? And if they're failing to log in, is it always the same user because they're using a bad password? Or maybe somebody's trying to brute force one user account. And then you might also look at the IP address that we're also storing here. And then you might see it's always coming from the same IP address. And then you could maybe block the IP address because somebody is trying to brute force a user account. So once you have this in a more structured format, and it's not just one log line, but it has distinct fields that you can filter on and work on, then you can get much more value out of that log event rather than just having a classic log file. So we have been able to start this, and I see somebody has written a script that seems to try to log in every second, which is fine. If you run a denial of service attack against the service, yeah, it will die at some point, but we still get some logs at least. And you can see here, this looks like the classical log event. But if I head back to Cabana now, let me restart that streaming. We should be getting the latest log events, so this looks good. And now I could, for example, open one of these up here to see how the entire event looks like. So here we have a lot of meta information, but you can see, for example, the event category, login failure, is explicitly pulled out of this event here. And for example, I could now just say like, I want to filter my view on login failures. And now I'm just seeing the users that have failed to log in. Or for example, we have this nice visualization here, which is called Lens, where you just have the fields that you have here, and we could drop that or per drag and drop create a visualization. So let me check. We have a field, for example, called username. And I would be interested in which usernames have been the most common to try to log in. And you can see here, okay, these events didn't have a username because probably they were not our service. So we would need to filter that down on service.name again equals this one here. So you can totally filter down. Since this is a search engine, you can just slice and dice and limit your data any way you want. And you can see that, for example, in the last 15 minutes, or maybe I've been talking too long, let's extend this to 30 minutes now. You can see that Agriel here did, in the last 30 minutes, did that many login requests, dropped user tables, yeah, little Bobby tables is here as well, and had 4 login attempts. Since this is not a relational database, this will not work, but it's a great idea to try it out. And Blark also had or tried 4 login accounts or 4 logins. And then you could, for example, add as well where these successful or unsuccessful. And then you could have nice visualizations to see which users tried to log in, where they're successful, or what is the current success and error rate of people trying to log into your service here. So this is just working the way you would expect it to. Just to give you another idea of, let me show you how this looks in Discover. So we're still filtering down on the Spring Boot security name and the log level 1. and we can open one of these. And now you will have, or just to show you this richer document structure where you can actually see what was happening here. So here, this was one of the stack traces. There is no admin here. You could even unfold the entire stack trace to see how this looks like. And you can still, so this is the long stack trace. This just works. And you can see what has gone wrong here. And you see the event category is the login failure again. And then at some point you have the username down here, which was admin. You can see the URL. You could see the source IP where this was coming from. By having this in a more structured format, you get a lot more value out of these logs. So we're trying to get more to events just from these classic log lines. But the trade-off is, of course, this is domain specific, and you will need to add this explicitly. So as I've shown you here, you will need to figure out username is a relevant thing to add to this log event. So you set this MDC key here, and then we include that in the log. But this will make this a much nicer setup. Final point, and you might have seen that further up here when I started my application, or maybe it's too far up. I added one other thing. We added an APM agent for tracing. This is the final piece here. So you can just add this. This is, if you know Zipkin, as in distributed tracing, we have an agent for that for Java and many other languages as well. Ours is very nice because you can just edit at runtime with -java agent, and then it will get a lot of information out of your application as well. And this, by the way, will be correlated with your application logs as well. So let me switch that over to the last 15 minutes because we just started our service. This is the demo effect, go away. Now this is better. So first off, you can see where you spent your time. So I don't have a database, otherwise you would see that as well, but I spent most of my time in my application and not in time leave. You can see how long does it take to serve your transactions, and how many requests are we serving. So I can see, thanks, I'm getting a lot of login requests from you, so this is good. And you can also see where we're spending our time. And for example, here, with this route, this is, I think, the login. You can see how long they are taking. So you can see somebody trying the login here. And you could see, for example, here we have one request where somebody tried to log in. And then you could, for example, see, I want to see the logs for this trace. And then you will be taken over to the logs view, and you can easily correlate the tracing information. How long did it take? Was it successful? The entire context of this call. But you can then dive into the specific log lines for one of these events. And if my internet keeps up, or my laptop, I don't know, then I will be able to show you, okay, so this one specific event was when user A failed to log in without the password. So these are all the log events in a 2-hour time frame for this specific user. But by having everything in one stack and Elasticsearch, you can then easily correlate that. And we have metrics, so we could get JMX information, for example, or Prometheus data, and correlate that with your logs, your traces, and the metrics. And that's kind of like this complete picture that will make your life much easier. It's like going from just log lines to events that will give you this richer view. So this is the idea here. And I think I'm pretty much out of time. So we have 2 minutes left. One thing that we have recently added, this is something people often struggle with. We have a lifecycle management for our logs now, which will be set up automatically. And this will basically move your logs from the ones that are currently being written to the ones that are kind of archived and stale that you just want to search, to being removed. And you can just click that together in the UI and automatically remove your logs, for example, after 30 days, because you don't want to keep them around for longer. And this can also be easily configured in the stack now so that you have this full life cycle of your log events. Okay, to wrap up, I hope I've made it clear why you want to structure your logs and why log lines and regular expressions, while you can use them and sometimes you don't have much choice like with legacy applications, they make your life harder. And unless you want to work more and write regular expressions, which I'm lazy, I don't, Unless you want to do that, I would try to avoid it. So with that ECS logger, you will make your life easier and get to these richer, more structured events. If you want to have more control over your log events, there are, from the community, two alternatives libraries, one for Log4j and the other one for Logback, that you could use. But if you just want that curated view with the ECS structured logs, the one that we provide is probably the easiest choice. So this should make your life much easier there. Everything I've shown you is open and free, so you can just go wild, especially right now with budgets probably tightening. If you need a free tool, whatever I've shown you, you can just use and spin up somewhere and go wild. So thanks a lot for listening. I hope you got some new ideas for how to work with your logs. If you want to get the slides, this is the QR code to get to the slides. I can tweet out the demo code, but it's really just a couple of lines in the Spring Boot Starter security demo. All you need to do basically is add that ECS logging library that emits the JSON, and then you tail the JSON and you're good to go. And with that, I think we're good to take a couple of questions. We should have exactly 5 minutes left for that.
All right, so thank you very much, Philipp. Really insightful. So there are a bunch of questions here in the Discord channel. So maybe we can go through some of them. And if we don't have to go over all of them, you can jump into the Discord channel and answer them. So we have the first one. So it's saying using JSON logs combined with multiple logs such as stack traces is hard to parse. So do you have any advice on how to do this the best way?
Yes. So so what you have here, this is the file the JSON file that we are generating. And let me just open.
Just a second, because it seems that we are not sharing the screen.
Sorry. Okay. So my bad. So if you would look in the JSON file, what you would see is that the stack traces are still one single line. They are you have a \n and \t basically. But Cabana will then visualize that correctly, but it's still one single line, so you don't have this multi-line problem anymore with stack traces. So everything that is being generated by the JSON logs here is just one single line, so you won't break them up. And since it's JSON already, you don't have to do any parsing.
We have the screen share now, so I'm not sure if you want to show something.
Sorry. Yes. So I have opt logs, Spring Boot log.json. That's the right file that I wanted to have. And somewhere here, so here you can see this very long one here. This is one stack trace, but this is still one single line. And you can see they are new line delimited here. So this is one line, so we won't break that up. So you don't have any parsing issues here. And you don't have to try to make the steak out of the burger anymore, or create out of the sushi the fish anymore. Because we don't break this up and this is correctly structured already.
Great, lovely.
I hope that answers it.
Yep. So next one, with ECS logging Java, everything I put into MDC goes to Cabana. If so, is there any way to cut off some of the properties we have in there?
Yes, so you can totally. So we call them ingest processes. So first off, FileBeat. In FileBeat, you can already say like, I want to drop specific fields. And then we could use an ingest processor in Elasticsearch where you actually have some rule to change the fields. For example, you could define maybe a maximum length for a field. But that you might already be able to do that in your log appender where you say like stack traces should only be limited to a specific size anyway. But yes, there are ways to actually manipulate the data. So the first thing is, don't add any fields that you don't need. Of course, you can remove everything later on, but it will just be more work for you. But you can drop fields and you can change fields, so you're not limited in any way there.
All right, thank you. So I think that we have time for yet another question. Is it easy to jump from classical Log4j to ELK?
Sorry, is it a jump?
To jump from classical Log4j to...
Well, so generally, you're still using Log4j as the log appender. So generally, the structure that you probably have is that the logging interface that you're using is SLF4j. And then the log appender that you have is Logback or Log4j2 or whatever you have. those stay the same. The only thing is that the outputting format or the formatter is the ECS logging library that we provide. So rather than writing out to that classic file, you just write out to JSON. But otherwise, your application doesn't change, and you don't really tie to us or our architecture in any way. The only thing that you need is you need to add that formatter, and then you tail that file. But nothing else in your application changes. So you're not tying yourself to us in any way, because that's not what, like, the logging library should not make or require changes all over your code. And you're just using general Java best practices, like using MVC and using a proper log appender and not println or whatever. But otherwise, you're all set. Like, you don't need to make any big changes.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Philipp. So if you have a couple of minutes, maybe you can jump into Discord.
I will generally jump into chat and try to answer anything that we have missed.
Yes, because we have some more questions over there. Well, thank you very much for your session, right? And thank you for joining this at your bridge. And I'll see you next time, hopefully in person.
I hope so too. Everybody enjoy your day. See you later.
Bye. So we'll be back at 5 to 10. So we're going to have a 10-minute break. So grab your coffee and we'll be ready in 10 minutes.